The automatic doors of St. Mary's Medical Center burst open as a small figure stumbled through them, his rain-soaked clothes clinging to his trembling body. Ethan Walker, barely 10 years old, collapsed to his knees on the pristine hospital floor, his arms wrapped protectively around the limp form of his 6-year-old sister. Blood trickled down the side of her pale face, mixing with rainwater to create pink rivulets that dripped onto the white tiles. The sight that greeted the emergency room staff would haunt them for weeks to come, but it was what they discovered during their examination that would force them to make a call that would change everything. Before we dive deeper into this heart-wrenching tale, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room cast harsh shadows across the scene as nurses rushed toward the children. Ethan's chest heaved with exhaustion, his small frame shaking from cold and exertion. He had carried Lily for what felt like an eternity through the torrential downpour that had descended upon Pine Ridge, his legs now barely able to support his own weight. The senior nurse on duty, Margaret Chen, dropped the chart she had been reviewing and sprinted across the lobby, her years of experience immediately recognizing the severity of the situation. "I'd need a trauma team here now," she called out, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of the early morning emergency department. Within seconds, the relatively calm atmosphere transformed into controlled chaos as medical professionals converged on the two children. Dr. Rebecca Foster, who had been catching up on paperwork in the physician's lounge, appeared at Margaret's side, her white coat billowing behind her as she moved with practiced urgency. "What do we have?" Dr. Foster asked, already crouching beside the children, her trained eyes scanning for immediate life threats. Ethan's grip on his sister tightened instinctively as strangers surrounded them, his protective instinct still firing despite his obvious exhaustion. His brown eyes, wide with fear and determination, locked onto the doctor's face as he struggled to form words through chattering teeth. She won't wake up," Ethan managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. I tried everything." The desperation in his young voice struck something deep within every adult present. Here was a child who had clearly pushed himself far beyond his physical limits, driven by a love and responsibility that seemed too heavy for his narrow shoulders to bear. Dr. Foster's gentle hands began their assessment of Lily, noting the head, wound that was still seeping blood through what appeared to be a makeshift bandage fashioned from a torn t-shirt. The little girl's breathing was shallow but steady, her skin cool to the touch. Years of treating injured children had taught Rebecca to read between the lines of what she saw, and something about this situation set off alarm bells in her mind that went beyond the immediate medical emergency. "Can you tell me your name, sweetheart?" Margaret asked softly, wrapping a warm blanket around Ethan's shoulders while the medical team carefully transferred Lily onto a gurney. The boy seemed to struggle with the simple question, exhaustion and shock making his thoughts sluggish. Thunder rumbled outside, rattling the hospital windows and causing him to flinch involuntarily. "I'm Ethan," he finally whispered, his eyes never leaving his sister's still form. "That's Lily. She's my sister. Please help her." The raw vulnerability in his plea brought tears to more than one set of eyes in the emergency room. Meanwhile, Dr. Foster had begun her examination in earnest, her movements precise and efficient as she checked Lily's pupils, assessed her breathing, and carefully examined the head wound. "Ethan, I need you to help me understand what happened," Dr. Foster said, maintaining her professional calm even as her medical intuition screamed that this was more than a simple accident. "How did Lily get hurt? Why did you bring her here by yourself in the middle of the night?" The question seemed to trigger something in the boy. His already pale face grew even whiter, and his eyes darted toward the entrance as if expecting someone to burst through at any moment. The fear that flashed across his features was so profound that Margaret instinctively moved closer, creating a protective barrier between the child and the outside world. There was no one else, Ethan said, his voice cracking with emotion. Mom's at work. She works nights at Riverbend, and Connor. He stopped abruptly, pressing his lips together as if trying to physically hold back words that threatened to spill out. The name hung in the air like a dark cloud, heavy with unspoken implications. Dr. Foster exchanged a meaningful glance with Margaret. In their combined decades of emergency medicine, they had learned to recognize the signs of stories untold, of secrets that children carried like stones in their pockets. The doctor continued her examination, while Margaret gently encouraged Ethan to sit in a wheelchair, recognizing that the boy was dangerously close to collapse himself. "Let's get you checked out too, honey," Margaret said, wheeling him alongside Lily's gurney as they moved toward the trauma bay. "You must be exhausted. How far did you carry her?" Ethan's response sent a chill through everyone within earshot. "From Cedar Grove Apartments. I couldn't call anyone. Connor took Mom's phone, and our regular phone doesn't work anymore." The math was staggering. Cedar Grove Apartments sat on the far side of Pine Ridge, at least 3 miles from the hospital. The storm that continued to rage outside had been building for hours, turning streets into rivers and making visibility nearly impossible. As they entered the brightly lit trauma room, the full extent of both children's condition became apparent. Ethan's feet, visible through worn sneakers that had clearly seen better days, were bloody and blistered. His thin jacket, soaked through, did little to hide the bruising that darkened his upper arms, but it was the look in his eyes that told the real story. A mixture of fear, exhaustion, and a protective determination that seemed far too mature for his age. "I need portable X-ray. In here," Dr. Foster called out, her examination of Lily revealing more concerns. The head wound, while serious, appeared to be the most obvious injury, but the doctor's experienced hands detected subtle signs that made her stomach tighten with professional concern. "And someone page Dr. Martinez from Pediatrics. I want a second opinion." The trauma room filled with the orchestrated dance of medical professionals, each playing their part in the careful assessment of both children. Ethan sat rigid in the wheelchair, wrapped in warming blankets but shivering nonetheless. His eyes tracked every movement around his sister, his body tensing whenever anyone appeared to cause her discomfort, even as they worked to save her. "Ethan," Dr. Foster said gently, pulling up a rolling stool to sit at his eye level while the nurses continued their work. "I know you're scared, and I promise we're doing everything we can for Lily, but I need you to help me understand exactly what happened tonight. Can you tell me how she got hurt?" The boy's internal struggle was visible on his young face, his eyes filled with tears that he furiously blinked back, and his hands clenched and unclenched in his lap. Whatever secret he was holding, it was clearly tearing him apart. The monitors attached to Lily beeped steadily, creating a rhythm that seemed to count down to some inevitable revelation. "He didn't mean to," Ethan finally whispered, the words so quiet they were almost lost in the ambient noise of the emergency room. "Connor didn't mean to push her that hard. She fell wrong." The admission seemed to break something inside him, and the tears he had been fighting finally spilled over, running down his dirt-streaked cheeks. Dr. Foster felt her heart sink even as her suspicions were confirmed. She had seen too many cases like this, too many children carrying burdens they should never have to bear. With practiced calm, she continued her gentle questioning, while Margaret quietly stepped out to follow hospital protocol. Within minutes, Officer Diana Russo would receive a call that would set in motion a chain of events that would forever change the Walker family's life. "Where is Connor now, Ethan?" Dr. Foster asked, keeping her voice neutral and non-threatening. The boy's reaction was immediate and visceral. He grabbed the arms of the wheelchair, his knuckles white with tension, and his breathing quickened to near panic levels. "He left," Ethan gasped out between jagged breaths. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. After Lily wouldn't wake up, he said if I told anyone, they'd take us away from Mom, that we'd never see her again. But I couldn't. I couldn't just leave her there. She needed help. The weight of his impossible choice was evident in every word, the moral dilemma that no child should ever face, laid bare in the sterile light of the trauma room. As the medical team worked to stabilize Lily, whose condition remained serious but stable, the larger picture began to emerge. Blood tests, X-rays, and careful documentation would reveal a pattern that painted a disturbing picture. But in that moment, all Ethan knew was that he had done what he had to do to save his sister, even if it meant risking everything else. The storm outside showed no signs of abating, rain lashing against the windows with renewed fury. But inside, the emergency room, a different kind of storm was brewing, one that would strip away secrets, expose hidden truths, and ultimately test the bonds of family in ways that would push everyone involved to their limits. As Dr. Foster began the delicate process of documenting injuries and preparing for the inevitable arrival of law enforcement and social services, she couldn't help but marvel at the courage of the small boy before her, who had carried not just his sister through the storm, but the weight of an adult world's failures and secrets. The clock on the wall of their modest Cedar Grove apartment read 6:47 p.m. when Sarah Walker finally collapsed onto the worn sofa, still wearing her scrubs from her day shift at Pine Ridge Family Clinic. The evening light filtered through threadbare curtains, casting long shadows across the cramped living room that served as the heart of their home. Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, methodically working through his fourth-grade math homework, while keeping one eye on Lily, who hummed tunelessly as she colored at the coffee table. "Mom, can we have pancakes for dinner?" Lily asked without looking up from her drawing, her small hand gripping a purple crayon as she filled in what appeared to be a dragon with flowers growing from its back. At 6 years old, her imagination knew no bounds, and her artwork reflected the beautiful chaos of her young mind. Sarah smiled despite her exhaustion, the kind of bone-deep fatigue that came from working 2 jobs while raising 2 children alone. "Pancakes for dinner? That's not very nutritious, sweetie," she said, though her tone suggested she might be persuaded. The truth was, their pantry was running low, and pancake mix was one of the few things they had in abundance thanks to a sale at the grocery store last week. "Please?" Lily's blue eyes, so like her father's it sometimes made Sarah's heart ache, turned toward her with practiced innocence. "Ethan likes pancakes too. Don't you, Ethan?" Ethan glanced up from his homework, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Even at 10, he understood the financial constraints their family faced, had learned to read the worry lines that creased their mother's forehead when bills arrived. "Pancakes sound good, Mom. I can help make them." The offer wasn't unusual. Since Ryan had left 4 years ago, Ethan had gradually taken on more responsibilities around the house, not because Sarah asked him to, but because he seemed to sense what needed to be done. He helped Lily with her homework, made sure she brushed her teeth before bed, and had learned to prepare simple meals when Sarah's shifts ran late. "My helpful boy," Sarah murmured, reaching down to ruffle his dark hair. "All right, pancakes it is, but we're having fruit with them. There are some apples in the fridge that need to be eaten." The apartment, while small, was meticulously clean. Sarah took pride in maintaining their home, even if the furniture was second-hand and the appliances temperamental. The walls were adorned with Lily's artwork and Ethan's school certificates, creating a gallery of childhood achievements that made the space feel warm despite its limitations. A small bookshelf in the corner overflowed with library books, evidence of Sarah's determination to foster a love of reading in her children despite their circumstances. As Sarah pushed herself up from the sofa, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. The number that flashed across the screen made her stomach flutter with a mixture of anticipation and something else she couldn't quite name. Connor Mitchell. They had been dating for 5 months now, having met when he came to the clinic with a work-related injury. He had been charming, attentive, different from the other men she'd tentatively dated since Ryan left. "Hey," she answered, moving toward the kitchen area that was separated from the living room by a small counter. "How was your day?" Connor's deep voice filled her ear, warm and familiar. "Long, cruise behind schedule on the Riverside project. Listen, I was thinking about coming over tonight. Brought my toolbox. I could finally fix that leaky faucet in your bathroom." Sarah glanced at her children, Ethan now helping Lily clean up her crayons. The offer was tempting. The faucet had been dripping for weeks, and their landlord, Mr. Petrosky, was notoriously slow about repairs. But she also valued the quiet evenings with just her and the kids, especially since her night shifts at Riverbend Nursing Home would start again tomorrow. "That's sweet of you," she said, lowering her voice slightly. "But I promised the kids a quiet night. Ethan has a science test tomorrow, and Lily's been having trouble sleeping lately." There was a pause on the other end, just long enough for Sarah to notice. When Connor spoke again, his tone had shifted subtly. "Come on, Sarah, I'm trying to help out here. Be part of the family. The kids like me, don't they?" The question hung in the air. The truth was more complicated than a simple yes or no. Lily, with her open heart and trusting nature, had warmed to Connor quickly. She laughed at his jokes, showed him her drawings, and had even started calling him Mr. Connor with affection. But Ethan was different. Polite, yes. Respectful, certainly. But there was a wariness in his interactions with Connor that Sarah had noticed but hadn't wanted to examine too closely. "Of course they do," she said, perhaps too quickly. "It's just been a long week and—" "I get it," Connor interrupted, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But you can't keep me at arm's length forever, Sarah. If this is going somewhere, really going somewhere, then I need to be part of your whole life, not just the convenient parts." The words stung, partly because they held some truth. Sarah had been cautious about introducing men into her children's lives, having learned hard lessons from Ryan's abandonment. But Connor had been patient, understanding. He brought takeout when she worked late, helped Ethan with his math homework, and had even attended Lily's kindergarten play last month. "You're right," she conceded, watching as Ethan efficiently set the table for dinner, automatically putting out 4 places before catching himself and removing one. "Why don't you come for dinner Saturday? I'm off this weekend. We could do something special." Connor's mood lightened immediately. "That's my girl. Saturday it is. And Sarah, I really do care about you, all of you." After ending the call, Sarah stood for a moment in the kitchen, staring at the phone in her hand. The conversation left her feeling unsettled in ways she couldn't articulate. She shook off the feeling and turned to find Ethan watching her with those 2 perceptive eyes of his. "Mr. Connor wanted to come over?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. Sarah nodded, moving to get the pancake mix from the cupboard. "I told him Saturday would be better. Is that okay with you?" Ethan shrugged, but she caught the slight tension in his shoulders. "Sure, Mum. Whatever you want." As they prepared dinner together, the apartment filled with the comforting smell of pancakes and the sound of Lily's chatter about her day at school. She'd lost a tooth at lunch, she informed them proudly, displaying the gap in her smile like a badge of honor. "The tooth fairy would surely come tonight," she declared with absolute certainty. Sarah watched her children interact, Ethan cutting Lily's pancakes into bite-sized pieces without being asked, Lily insisting on putting syrup on his plate for him. These were the moments she treasured, the simple domesticity that made all the struggles worthwhile. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting, that the delicate balance she had worked so hard to maintain was beginning to tilt. The first real warning sign came 3 weeks later, though Sarah would only recognize it as such in hindsight. Connor had indeed fixed the leaky faucet that Saturday, along with a squeaky door hinge and a loose cabinet handle. He had been wonderful. With the kids, playing board games with Lily, and helping Ethan with a school project about the solar system. But something changed when Ryan called. It was a Tuesday evening and Connor was over for dinner. Sarah's ex-husband rarely called, his contact with the children sporadic at best, usually limited to birthdays and holidays. His child support payments were even less reliable, arriving months late if at all. So when Sarah's phone rang and Ryan's name appeared on the screen, everyone at the dinner table noticed. "I should take this," Sarah said apologetically, stepping into her bedroom for privacy. The conversation was brief and frustrating. Ryan was calling to say he couldn't make his promised visit next month, citing work obligations in California where he now lived. He didn't ask to speak to the children. When Sarah returned to the table, her face carefully composed, Connor's expression had darkened considerably. "Let me guess," he said, his voice carrying an edge she hadn't heard before. "Another a promise from the deadbeat dad?" "Connor," Sarah warned gently, glancing meaningfully at the children. Ethan had stopped eating, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth, while Lily looked confused by the sudden tension. "What?" "They should know what kind of man their father is," Connor continued, seemingly oblivious to or unconcerned by the children's presence. "Guy doesn't pay child support, never shows up, and you still jump when he calls." "That's enough," Sarah said firmly, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment and anger. "We can discuss this later." Connor pushed his plate away with more force than necessary, making the dishes rattle. "Whatever, I'm just trying to look out for you, for all of you." He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I need some air." The apartment door closed behind him with a bang that made Lily jump. In the silence that followed, Sarah could hear the drip of the kitchen faucet. Apparently not as fixed as they'd thought, and the rapid beating of her own heart. "Is Mr. Connor mad at us?" Lily asked in a small voice, her lower lip trembling. "No, sweetheart," Sarah assured her, reaching across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. "He's just frustrated about grown-up things. It's not your fault." Ethan remained silent, but the look he gave his mother spoke volumes. It was a look that said he understood more than she might want him to, that he saw through the careful explanations and diplomatic words. Sarah met his gaze briefly before looking away, unsettled by the maturity she saw there. Connor returned 20 minutes later, apologetic and bearing ice cream from the corner store as a peace offering. He ruffled Ethan's hair, gave Lily a playful tap on the nose, and pulled Sarah into a hug that lasted just a moment too long. "Sorry," he murmured into her ear. "I just hate seeing him hurt you guys." The evening recovered, at least on the surface. They watched a movie together. Lily curled up against Connor's side, while Ethan sat slightly apart, his homework spread on the coffee table before him. But something had shifted in the dynamic, a fault line exposed that would only widen in the weeks to come. The second incident occurred a month later. Sarah had picked up an extra shift at the nursing home, leaving Connor to watch the kids for the evening. She had hesitated initially. It would be the first time he'd been alone with them for more than an hour, but Connor had insisted he could handle it. "We'll be fine," he assured her that morning as she prepared to leave for her day shift. "I'll pick them up from school, help with homework, make dinner, piece of cake." Sarah had left detailed instructions. Ethan's soccer practice ended at 4:30. Lily needed her allergy medication with dinner. Bedtime was 8:30 sharp for Lily and 9 Hang for Ethan. She had stocked the fridge with easy meal options and left emergency numbers on the counter, though she knew Connor would likely roll his eyes at her over-preparedness. The first text came around 6 p.m. All good here, kids doing homework, making spaghetti for dinner. The second arrived at 7:30. Lily spilled juice on your laptop. No major damage, but keyboard's sticky. Sorry. Sarah grimaced at that. She needed the laptop for her online nursing education courses, but accidents happened. She texted back not to worry about it, that she'd clean it properly when she got home. It wasn't until she returned home at 11:30 p.m. that she realized something was off. The apartment was darker than usual, only the kitchen light on. Connor sat at the table, a beer in front of him. Strange, since she didn't usually keep alcohol in the house. "Hey," he said, not looking up from his phone. "Kids are asleep." Sarah set down her purse, noting the unusual stillness in the apartment. Normally, she could hear the white noise machine in the kids' room, the one that helped Lily sleep through the night. How did everything go? Really? Connor finally looked up, and she saw something in his expression that made her stomach clench. "Fine, though you might want to talk to Ethan about his attitude." His attitude? Sarah moved toward the children's bedroom, but Connor's next words stopped her. "He questioned everything I did. Dinner wasn't the way you make it. Lily's bedtime. Routine was wrong. I wasn't helping with homework correctly." Connor's voice carried a bitterness that seemed disproportionate to the complaints. "Kid thinks he runs the place." Sarah felt a familiar defensiveness rise within her. Ethan had been the man of the house in many ways since he was 6 years old. He knew his sister's routines, understood their schedule, had helped maintain order in their small household when Sarah couldn't be there. "He's just used to things being done a certain way," she said carefully. "He's been helping me with Lily for years." Connor stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "That's the problem, Sarah. You've turned him into a mini-adult. It's not healthy. He needs to learn to be a kid, to respect authority." The word authority rankled something within Sarah, but she pushed the feeling aside. She was tired. Her feet ached from her long shift and she didn't want to argue. "Let's talk about this tomorrow," she suggested. "I need to check on the kids." She found both children asleep in their shared room, but something was off. Ethan's bed had been moved slightly, creating more distance between him and Lily's bed. Lily's favorite stuffed elephant, usually clutched in her arms, lay on the floor, and Ethan, who typically slept sprawled across his mattress, was curled into a tight ball facing the wall. When she returned to the living room, Connor was putting on his jacket. "I should go," he said, his tone softer now. "Early morning tomorrow, new project starting." Sarah nodded, confused by the sudden shift in mood, but too exhausted to probe deeper. After he left, she sat in the quiet apartment, trying to shake the feeling that she had missed something important. She cleaned the sticky laptop keyboard, checked the locks twice, and finally went to bed, though sleep eluded her for hours. The truth began to reveal itself in small ways over the following weeks. Ethan became quieter when Connor was around, his usual chatter subdued. He started having stomach aches on evenings when Connor was scheduled to visit. Lily, typically effervescent, seemed more clingy, following Sarah from room to room when Connor was present. But it was the subtle changes in Connor himself that should have alarmed her most. The way his compliments often carried a barb. "You look nice today, Sarah." Finally wearing something other than those old scrubs. The way he began to insert himself into parenting decisions. "Lily doesn't need that inhaler. Kids today are over-medicated." The way he watched Ethan with narrowed eyes when the boy helped, his sister with anything. The pattern emerged so gradually that Sarah found herself making excuses. Connor was stressed about work. He wasn't used to children. He was trying too hard to fit into their ready-made family. She rationalized each incident. explained away each red flag, because the alternative, admitting she had invited someone problematic into her children's lives, was too painful to contemplate. It came to a head on a Thursday evening in early October. Sarah had been called in for an emergency shift at the nursing home. A flu outbreak had left them critically short-staffed. Connor agreed to watch the kids, though she sensed reluctance in his voice. "It's just for a few hours," she promised. "I'll be home by midnight at the latest." When she left at 7 p.m., everything seemed normal. The kids were doing homework. Connor was heating up leftover casserole, and the evening stretched ahead peacefully. She kissed both children goodbye, reminded them to brush their teeth before bed, and headed out into the beginning of what would become a torrential rainstorm. As she drove away from Cedar Grove Apartments, Sarah couldn't shake the image of Ethan's face as she'd said goodbye. There had been something in his eyes, not quite fear, but a wariness that made her consider turning back. But the nursing home needed her, and her family needed the overtime pay. She would later wish with every fiber of her being that she had listened to that maternal instinct, that she had turned the car around, called in sick, chosen her children's unspoken needs over professional obligation. But hindsight is a cruel teacher, and some lessons come at too high a price. The storm that was building over Pine Ridge was nothing compared to the one brewing in apartment 2B at Cedar Grove. As Sarah drove through the darkening streets, windshield wipers fighting against the increasing rain, she had no way of knowing that this night would shatter the careful life she had built, sending fractures through their family that would take months, perhaps years, to heal. In the apartment, Connor opened his third beer of the evening, his mood darkening with each sip. Ethan watched him warily while helping Lily with her spelling words, that invisible weight already settling onto his young shoulders. The clock on. The wall ticked toward 8 p.m., marking time until the moment when everything would change, when childhood would end abruptly in violence and fear, when a 10-year-old boy would be forced to make an impossible choice between obedience and love. But for now, in these last moments of innocence, Lily sounded out words, while Ethan nodded encouragement, and Connor's eyes grew harder with each passing minute, the sound of rain against the windows providing an ominous soundtrack to the evenings. Awful potential. The first sign that Connor Mitchell was different from the image he projected came on an unseasonably warm Saturday afternoon in September. He had been dating Sarah for 4 months, and his integration into the Walker family seemed to be progressing smoothly, at least on the surface. That day, he arrived at the Cedar Grove apartment with a surprise: tickets to the Pine Ridge County Fair, complete with promises of cotton candy, carnival rides, and games of chance. "You didn't have to do this," Sarah protested, though her eyes sparkled with genuine pleasure. Between her 2 jobs and the constant struggle to make ends meet, treats like this were rare luxuries for the Walker family. "It must have cost a fortune." Connor waved off her concern with characteristic charm, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. "What's money for if not to spend on the people you care about?" He turned to the children, who were watching from the living room with barely contained excitement. "Besides, I promised these 2 we'd do something special before school really gets into full swing." Lily bounced on her toes, her blonde pigtails swinging with the motion. "Can we ride the Ferris wheel and play the duck game and get funnel cake?" "Anything you want, princess," Connor assured her, the endearment flowing easily from his lips. He had begun calling Lily that within weeks of meeting her, and she glowed under the attention. "What about you, Ethan? What are you looking forward to?" Ethan, who had been standing slightly apart with his hands in his pockets, offered a cautious smile. "The bumper cars are cool," he said, his tone more reserved than his sister's open enthusiasm. "And maybe the science exhibit they have this year." Connor's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Science exhibit? At a fair? Come on, buddy, loosen up. We're here to have fun, not study. Sarah, busy gathering sunscreen and water bottles, missed the brief flash of hurt that crossed Ethan's face. But she didn't miss the way her son's shoulders hunched slightly or how he edged closer to her side as they prepared to leave. She made a mental note to make sure they visited the science exhibit, regardless of Connor's opinion on the matter. The fair was everything a small-town celebration should be, crowded, noisy, and filled with the mingled scents of fried food and fresh-cut grass. The fairgrounds buzzed with activity as families moved between attractions, children's laughter, mixing with the mechanical sounds of rides and the calls of game operators, trying to entice players to test their luck. For the first hour, everything seemed perfect. Connor won a stuffed unicorn for Lily at the ring toss, let both children pick out treats from the candy apple stand, and even joined them on the spinning teacups, though Sarah noticed he gripped the center wheel with white knuckles throughout the ride. He took photos of them all, insisted on buying matching fair t-shirts, and seemed genuinely engaged in creating a memorable day. The trouble began at the bumper cars. Ethan, who had been looking forward to this particular ride all day, lined up eagerly with the other children while Connor and Sarah watched from the sidelines with Lily, who was too small to ride alone. The operator, a teenage boy with acne and a bored expression, explained the rules in a monotone voice. No head-on collisions, no ganging up on other drivers, keep your hands inside the car at all times. When the ride began, Ethan proved to be surprisingly adept at maneuvering his bright blue car around the track. He dodged other drivers with quick reflexes, occasionally bumping into them with the gentle impacts the ride was designed for. His face was lit with genuine joy, a rare sight that made Sarah's heart warm. "Look at him go," she said to Connor, squeezing his hand. "I haven't seen him this happy in weeks." Connor didn't respond, his attention fixed on the track with an intensity that seemed out of proportion to a children's ride. Sarah followed his gaze and noticed he was watching a group of older kids, maybe 12 or 13, who were clearly targeting younger riders, ramming into them repeatedly despite the operator's rules. When one of these older kids slammed into Ethan's car from behind, sending it spinning, Connor's jaw clenched visibly. The second time it happened, his hand tightened around Sarah's until she winced. "Connor, you're hurting me," she said quietly. He released her hand immediately, but his focus remained on the track. When the older boy rammed Ethan a third time, laughing as the younger child struggled to regain control of his car, Connor stepped forward. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the carnival noise. "Back off!" The ride operator looked up from his phone, startled by the adult intervention. "Sir, please stay behind the barrier." But Connor was already at the fence, his face flushed with anger. "That kid is bullying the younger ones. Do your job." The operator, clearly uncomfortable with confrontation, mumbled something about the ride being almost over. Sure enough, the cars began to slow as the timer ran out. As the children climbed out of their vehicles, Connor was waiting at the exit, his expression dark. Ethan approached cautiously, his earlier joy replaced by wariness. "Hi, Connor. That was fun." "Fun?" Connor's voice was sharp. "You just let those bigger kids push you around. Why didn't you fight back?" Sarah stepped forward, Lily's hand in hers. "Connor, it's just a ride. He did great out there." "Did he?" Connor turned to Ethan, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. "In the real world, you can't just let people walk all over you. You need to learn to stand up for yourself." "I was just trying to avoid them," Ethan said quietly, his cheeks red with embarrassment. "Exactly. Avoiding confrontation, running away." Connor shook his head in disgust. "That's not how men handle problems." Sarah felt a surge of protective anger. "He's 10 years old, Connor, and he handled it perfectly. Not everything has to be a fight." The tension between them was palpable, drawing curious glances from other fairgoers. Lily, sensitive to the atmosphere, pressed closer to her mother's leg. After a moment, Connor seemed to realize he had overreacted. His expression softened, and he forced a laugh. "You're right. Sorry. Buddy," he said, ruffling Ethan's hair with a bit too much force. "I just hate seeing anyone pick on you. How about we hit the basketball game next? I'll win you that skateboard you were eyeing." The moment passed, smoothed over by Connor's quick shift back to congeniality, but something had changed. For the rest of the afternoon, Ethan stayed close to his mother, politely declining Connor's repeated offers to try various games or rides together. Sarah found herself watching Connor more carefully, noting the way his mood seemed to shift unpredictably, how his reactions often seemed disproportionate to the situation. The science exhibit, when they finally reached it, proved to be another point of contention. Housed in one of the agricultural buildings, it featured interactive displays about renewable energy, local wildlife, and climate change. Ethan immediately gravitated toward a solar panel demonstration, his eyes lighting up as a volunteer explained how photovoltaic cells converted sunlight into electricity. "This is so cool," Ethan said, carefully adjusting the angle of a small panel to maximize its energy output. "Mrs. Patterson was just teaching us about this in science class. She said solar power could help solve climate change." Connor, who had been texting on his phone, looked up with a snort. "Climate change? They're filling your head with that nonsense at school?" The volunteer, a college student with earnest eyes and a Pine Ridge University t-shirt, looked taken aback. "Actually, sir, the science on climate change is quite clear." "Save it," Connor cut him off. "I work in construction. I know what's real and what's just political agenda." He turned to Ethan. "Don't believe everything they teach you, kid. Real world doesn't work like your textbooks say." Ethan's face fell, his enthusiasm visibly deflating. Sarah intervened quickly, guiding them toward another display about local bird species, but the damage was done. For the rest of their time in the exhibit, Ethan was subdued, asking fewer questions and avoiding Connor's gaze. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah began to notice a pattern in Connor's behavior. He was wonderful with Lily, patient, indulgent, playful, but his interactions with Ethan carried an undercurrent of criticism and challenge. When Ethan expressed interest in something Connor deemed unmanly or impractical, there was always a corrective comment, a subtle put-down disguised as life advice. The breaking point came near the end of their fair visit. They had stopped at a game booth where players tried to knock down stacked bottles with a baseball. Connor, after watching Ethan miss with his first two throws, stepped forward. "Here, let me show you how it's done," he said, taking the last ball from Ethan's hand without asking. His throw was powerful and accurate, sending bottles flying. The booth operator grudgingly handed over a medium-sized stuffed bear. "See," Connor said, presenting the bear to Ethan with a condescending smile. "It's all about technique and force. You throw like you're afraid of the ball." "I don't throw like I'm afraid," Ethan protested quietly. Connor's expression darkened. "Excuse me. You talking back to me?" "Connor," Sarah warned, stepping between them. "That's enough." "I'm just trying to teach him something," Connor insisted, his voice rising. "Kid needs to toughen up. The world's not going to coddle him like you."
The accusation stung, and Sarah felt her own temper flare.
"We're leaving," she announced, taking both children by the hand. "Now." The drive home was silent, except for Lily's occasional sniffles. She had picked up on the tension and was fighting back tears. Connor drove with rigid precision, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Ethan stared out the window, the stuffed bear clutched in his lap like a shield. When they reached the apartment, Connor pulled into the parking lot, but didn't turn off the engine. "I think I should go," he said, not looking at Sarah. "Cool off a bit." Sarah nodded, too emotionally exhausted to argue. As the children climbed out of the car, Connor called after them. "Hey, I'm sorry things got weird. Next time will be better, okay?" Lily managed a small wave, but Ethan just walked toward their building without acknowledging him. Sarah watched, her sons retreating back, noting the defeated slump of his shoulders, and felt a surge of protective anger mixed with guilt. She had brought Connor into their lives, had been so eager for partnership and support that she had perhaps overlooked warning signs. That night, after Lily was asleep, Sarah found Ethan sitting on his bed, the stuffed bear beside him. "Want to talk about today?" she asked, sitting down next to him. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "He doesn't like me very much, does he?" The question broke Sarah's heart. "Of course he likes you, sweetheart. Connor he has different ideas about things sometimes. He doesn't always express himself well." "He's nice to Lily," Ethan observed. "But with me, it's like I can't do anything right." Sarah pulled him into a hug, feeling the tension in his small body. "That's not true. You're amazing, and anyone who can't see that is the one with the problem, not you." But even as she comforted, her son Sarah couldn't shake the growing unease about Connor's behavior. She told herself it was just an adjustment period, that Connor was still learning how to be part of a ready-made family. Men often had different ideas about raising boys, she rationalized. Maybe Connor was just trying too hard to be a father. Vigor. The weeks that followed seemed to support this theory. Connor apologized profusely for his behavior at the fair, bringing Ethan a book about solar energy and promising to be more supportive of his interests. He made an effort to engage with both children equally, helped with homework without criticism, and even attended Ethan's school science fair, where he praised the boys' project on renewable energy sources. But the damage from that day at the fair had created a fissure in their family dynamic. Ethan, while polite, maintained a careful distance from Connor. He no longer shared his thoughts and interests as freely when Connor was around, answering questions with brief responses and finding reasons to be in another room. Connor, for his part, seemed to sense this withdrawal and responded with increasing frustration. His attempts at bonding became more aggressive, insisting on teaching Ethan to throw a football despite the boy's obvious lack of interest, criticizing his choice of books as too nerdy, making comments about his need to man up that were always followed by claims he was just joking. Sarah found herself caught in the middle, trying to bridge the gap between her son and her boyfriend while managing her own growing doubts. She started making excuses for why Connor couldn't join them for certain activities, creating separate spaces where Ethan could be himself without judgment. It was exhausting, this constant emotional juggling act. But she told herself it was temporary, things would get better, they had to. The second major incident occurred on a Friday evening in early October. Sarah had taken a rare evening off from her nursing home job, and Connor had suggested they have a family movie night. He arrived with pizza, popcorn, and a selection of DVDs he'd picked up from the closing video store in town. "I got some classics," he announced, spreading the cases on the coffee table. Die Hard, Terminator, Predator, real movies, not that animated stuff. Lily, who had been excited about movie night, looked disappointed. "But I wanted to watch Frozen again." Connor's jaw tightened slightly. "You've seen that movie 100 times, Princess. Time to watch something new." "These are all rated R," Sarah pointed out, checking the DVD cases. "They're not appropriate for the kids." "Oh, come on," Connor scoffed. "I watched these when I was Ethan's age. It's not going to hurt them. Besides, all that Disney princess stuff is turning kids soft these days." Ethan, who had been quietly reading in the corner, looked up. "I don't really like violent movies," he said carefully. "Could we watch something else? Maybe Star Wars?" Connor rolled his eyes. "Star Wars is for nerds. These are real action movies. Might actually teach you something about being tough." The criticism, casual as it was, made Ethan shrink back into his book. Sarah felt the familiar tension building and quickly intervened. "How about we compromise? We'll watch something everyone can enjoy. I think we have The Incredibles somewhere." "A superhero cartoon?" Connor's tone dripped with disdain. "Great, more fantasy garbage." "It's not garbage," Ethan said quietly, surprising everyone with his defense. "It's about family and using your abilities to help others." Connor turned to him with a condescending smile. "Is that what you think? That watching cartoons about fake superheroes means something? In the real world, kiddo, strength is what matters. Physical strength, mental toughness, not magic powers and feel-good messages." "Connor, that's enough," Sarah said firmly. "We're watching The Incredibles and that's final." The look Connor gave her was one she hadn't seen before, a flash of genuine anger, quickly masked by resignation. "Fine, whatever you say. I'm just trying to expose them to something different." They settled in to watch the movie, but the atmosphere was strained. Connor sat stiffly on one end of the couch, nursing a beer he'd brought from his truck, despite Sarah's request that he not drink around the children. Lily curled up next to her mother in the middle, while Ethan chose to sit on the floor with a pillow as far from Connor as possible while still being part of the family group. Throughout the movie, Connor provided a running commentary of criticism. The animation was childish, the plot was unrealistic, the villains were stupid. Each comment chipped away at the children's enjoyment until even Lily stopped laughing at the funny parts. About halfway through, Connor's phone rang. He answered it without stepping outside, his voice loud in the small apartment. From what Sarah could gather, it was about a work issue, something about supplies being delivered to the wrong site. His responses grew increasingly agitated, peppered with profanity that made both children uncomfortable. "Do you mind taking that outside?" Sarah finally asked, when he used a particularly crude phrase. Connor glared at her but stood up, continuing his conversation as he stepped onto the small balcony. Through the glass door, they could see him pacing, gesturing angrily as he talked. When he ended the call, he slammed his phone down on the balcony, railing with enough force to make them all jump. He came back inside with storm clouds in his eyes. "I have to go deal with this," he announced, grabbing his jacket. "Some idiot messed up a delivery, and now we're going to be behind schedule Monday." "Now?" Sarah asked, glancing at the clock. "It's Friday night. Can't it wait until morning?" "No, it can't wait," Connor snapped. "Some of us have real jobs, with real responsibilities. We can't all work banker's hours like at your clinic." The insult was sharp and unexpected. Sarah worked long, irregular hours between her two jobs, something Connor well knew. Before she could respond, he was already at the door. "Connor, wait!" she called after him, but he left without another word, the door slamming shut behind him. In the silence that followed, Lily's small voice piped up. "Why is Mr. Connor always so angry?" Sarah didn't have a good answer. She pulled. Both children closed, restarted the movie, and tried to salvage what was left of their evening. But the question lingered in her mind long after the children had gone to bed. Why was Connor always so angry? And why did that anger seem particularly focused on Ethan? The pattern continued over the following weeks. Connor would arrive in good spirits, bearing gifts or treats, full of promises about fun activities or special outings. But inevitably, something would trigger his temper, usually something related to Ethan, the boy's interest in science and reading, his lack of enthusiasm for sports, his quiet, thoughtful nature that Connor seemed to interpret as weakness. Sarah began to dread Connor's visits, even as she told herself she was overreacting. He had never been physically violent. He was just intense, passionate, set in his ways about gender roles and child rearing. These were things they could work through, she reasoned. All couples had disagreements about parenting styles, but late at night, when she lay awake replaying interactions in her mind, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. The way Ethan now tensed whenever Connor's truck pulled into the parking lot. How Lily had stopped running to greet him at the door. The walking on eggshells atmosphere that descended on their home whenever he was present. She tried talking to Connor about it once, during a rare moment alone together. They were having coffee at the diner where she worked, a brief meeting squeezed. Between her shifts, "I'm worried about your relationship with Ethan," she said carefully, stirring sugar into her cup to avoid meeting his eyes. "He seems uncomfortable around you lately." Connor's response was immediate and defensive. "Maybe if you didn't baby him so much, he wouldn't be so sensitive. The kid needs a male influence in his life, Sarah. Someone to teach him how to be a man." "He's 10 years old," Sarah protested. "He doesn't need to be a man yet. He needs to be a child." "That's exactly the problem." Connor leaned forward, his voice intense. "You're raising him to be soft, weak. The world is going to eat him alive if he doesn't toughen up. There's nothing wrong with being sensitive, with being interested in science and books instead of sports." Connor's laugh was harsh. "Spoken like a woman. You don't understand what it's like for boys out there. The bullying, the competition. I'm trying to prepare him for reality by bullying him yourself." The words were out before Sarah could stop them. Connor's face darkened. "Is that what you think? That I'm bullying your kid?" He stood abruptly, throwing money on the table for his coffee. "I'm done with this conversation. When you're ready to have an adult discussion about discipline and boundaries, let me know." He left her sitting there, staring at the coffee growing cold in her cup. The other diner patrons politely pretended not to have noticed the confrontation, but Sarah felt their curious glances. She wanted to run after him, to apologize, to smooth things over. But a larger part of her was relieved he had gone. That evening, she found Ethan in his room, building a model solar system for his science class. The planets were painted with careful detail, suspended from wire at precisely calculated distances. It was meticulous work, requiring patience and attention to detail, qualities Connor dismissed as weakness. "That looks amazing," she said, sitting on the edge of his bed. Ethan glanced up with a smile that faded quickly. "Connor says it's a waste of time, that I should be outside playing sports instead of playing with toys." Sarah felt a fresh surge of anger. "Connor's wrong. This is brilliant work, and I'm proud of you. You have to say that. You're my mom." "No," Sarah said firmly. "I say it because it's true. You're smart and creative and kind. Those are wonderful qualities. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Ethan was quiet for a moment, focusing on adjusting Jupiter's position. "Are you going to marry him?" The question caught Sarah off guard. We haven't talked about that. Why do you ask?" "Because if you do, he'll be here all the time, and I don't." Ethan's voice trailed off, but his meaning was clear. Sarah pulled him into a hug, feeling his small body relax against her. "Nothing is more important to me than you and Lily. Nothing. Do you understand?" He nodded against her shoulder, but she could feel his uncertainty. And in truth, she shared it. How had she let things get to this point? How had she allowed Connor's presence to become a source of stress rather than support for her family? The answer, she knew, lay in her own loneliness and exhaustion. The struggle of single parenthood had worn her down, made her vulnerable to the promise of partnership, of someone to share the burden. Connor had seemed like an answer to prayers she hadn't even admitted to praying. But at what cost? That night, after both children were asleep, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, thinking about the future. She needed to make some decisions, to set some boundaries, maybe even to end things with Connor if he couldn't accept her, children as they were. But first, she had to get through tomorrow. Connor was coming over to help fix the bathroom sink. Another repair their landlord had ignored. It would be a chance to talk, to try once more to make him understand. She owed him that much, she told herself. One more chance to prove he could. Be the partner she needed, the father figure her children deserved. As she finally headed to bed, Sarah had no way of knowing that tomorrow would never come, not in the way she planned. That in less than 24 hours, her careful attempts at balance would shatter completely, forcing choices she wasn't prepared to make. The bathroom sink would remain broken. The conversation would never happen, and the delicate facade of their blended family would crack beyond repair, revealing truths that had been hiding in plain sight all along. For now, though, she simply turned off the lights and checked on her sleeping children one more time, drawing comfort from their peaceful faces. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. That much, at least, she could promise them. The morning after their fair visit dawned grey and overcast, matching Sarah's mood as she prepared breakfast in the small kitchen. Both children had been unusually quiet since waking, and she noticed Ethan had placed the stuffed bear Connor won for him on the highest shelf in their room, turned to face the wall. The simple gesture spoke volumes about the previous day's impact. Sarah had barely slept, her mind replaying Connor's behavior at the fair, dissecting every interaction, every flash of anger, every moment of tension. She kept coming back to the same troubling conclusion. Something was fundamentally wrong with how Connor treated Ethan, and her attempts to rationalize it away were becoming increasingly difficult. As she flipped pancakes on the griddle, a Sunday morning tradition that usually brought smiles to her children's faces, her phone buzzed with a text from Connor. "Sorry about yesterday. Can I come by and talk? I have something for the kids." She stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. Part of her wanted to say no, to create some distance while she sorted through her feelings. But another part, the part that had been lonely for so long, that craved adult companionship and support, whispered that everyone deserved a second chance. "Mom, the pancake is burning," Lily's voice cut through her thoughts. Sarah quickly flipped the smoking pancake, scraping off the blackened bits. "Sorry, sweetheart, just distracted." Ethan looked up from his book. "Is Connor coming over today?" The question was asked with careful neutrality, but Sarah caught the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers tightened on the pages. She made a decision. "Not today," she said, turning off her phone without responding to the text. "Today is just for us. How about we go to the library after breakfast? They have that new science section you wanted to check out." The relief on Ethan's face was unmistakable. He smiled, a real smile, not the careful, guarded expression he wore around Connor. "That would be great. They have a book about the Mars rover I've been wanting to read. And they have princess books," Lily added, not to be outdone, "with sparkly covers." "Then it's settled," Sarah said, serving up the pancakes with a lighter heart. Library day it is. The Pine Ridge Public Library was housed in a converted Victorian mansion, its rooms filled with tall shelves and cozy reading nooks. Sarah watched her children scatter to their favorite sections, Ethan to the science corner, Lily to the picture books, and felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in weeks. She settled into a chair with a novel she'd been meaning to read, but found herself watching Ethan instead. He was completely absorbed in a book about astronomy, occasionally jotting notes in the small notebook he always carried. This was her son in his element, curious, engaged, learning. The contrast with his demeanor around Connor was stark. "He's quite the reader," a familiar voice said beside her. Sarah looked up to find Mrs. Davidson, the head librarian, smiling down at her. The elderly woman had known the Walker family since they'd first moved to Pine Ridge. "He goes through books like some kids go through candy," Sarah replied with a proud smile. Mrs. Davidson's expression grew thoughtful. "I've noticed he seems different lately, more reserved. Everything all right at home?" The question, gentle as it was, caught Sarah off guard. Was Ethan's unhappiness so obvious that others had noticed? "We're adjusting to some changes," she said carefully. Mrs. Davidson nodded knowingly. "Change can be hard on children, especially sensitive ones like Ethan." She paused, then added quietly, "You know my door is always open if you need someone to talk to. Sometimes an outside perspective helps." After the librarian moved on, Sarah sat thinking about her words. An outside perspective. Maybe that's exactly what she needed. She'd been so caught up in trying to make things work with Connor, so focused on not being alone, that she'd lost sight of what was truly important. Her phone buzzed again. "Connor, please answer. I'm really sorry. Let me make it up to you and the kids." Then another. "I know I overreacted. It won't happen again." And another. "Sarah, don't shut me out. We're good together." The succession of messages felt suffocating. She turned her phone to silent and tucked it into her purse, determined to enjoy this peaceful morning with her children. They stayed at the library until it closed at 5, checking out armfuls of books. Ethan chattered excitedly about the Mars, drove a book on the drive home, explaining complex concepts to Lily, who listened with wide-eyed fascination, even though she likely understood little of it. This was the family dynamic Sarah cherished, supportive, curious, kind. When they arrived at Cedar Grove Apartments, Connor's truck was in the parking lot. Sarah's stomach clenched as she recognized the familiar blue pickup. He was leaning against it, a bouquet of flowers in one hand and a gift bag in the other. His expression was contrite, apologetic, but Sarah noticed the tight set of his jaw, the way his eyes narrowed slightly when he saw their library books. "Gay," he said, approaching them as they got out of the car. "I've been waiting for a while, wanted to apologize in person." "Connor, I really don't think—" Sarah began, but he cut her off. "Please, just hear me out." He knelt down to the children's level, holding out the gift bag. "I brought something for you guys, peace offering." Lily, ever susceptible to gifts and unable to hold grudges, peeked into the bag. "Is it for me?" "For both of you," Connor said, his charm at full wattage. "Go ahead, take a look." Inside were two items, a new Disney princess coloring book for Lily and a football for Ethan. The gifts were telling in their own way, perfect for Lily, completely wrong for Ethan. "Thank you, Mr. Connor." Lily hugged the coloring book to her chest. Ethan held the football awkwardly. "Thanks," he said quietly, though Sarah could see the disappointment in his eyes. After spending the day immersed in books about space exploration, being given a football felt like Connor hadn't heard a single thing he'd ever said about his interests. "Can we talk?" Connor asked Sarah, standing up. "Just for a few minutes? The kids can go inside." Sarah hesitated, glancing at Ethan, who was watching the interaction with wary eyes. "Go ahead upstairs," she told them. "I'll be right up." Once the children were inside, Connor's demeanor shifted. The apologetic mask slipped, replaced by frustration. "You didn't answer my texts." "I needed some time to think," Sarah said, crossing her arms. "About what? About us." Connor stepped closer and Sarah caught the smell of beer on his breath. "Because of yesterday." "Come on, Sarah. I said I was sorry. I'm trying here." "Are you?" Sarah challenged. "Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you're trying to change my son into someone he's not." Connor's face flushed. "Someone has to teach him how to be a man. You're raising him to be weak, Sarah. The kid's afraid of his own shadow." "He's not afraid," Sarah shot back, anger overriding her usual desire to keep the peace. "He's careful. He's thoughtful. He's kind. Those aren't weaknesses. In the real world, they are." Connor's voice rose. "You think kindness matters? When someone's trying to take your job, you think being thoughtful helps in a fight. You're setting him up for failure. He's 10 years old. He shouldn't be thinking about fights and job competition. He should be reading books and playing and being a child." Connor laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's your problem, Sarah. You live in this fantasy world where everyone's nice and things work out. That's not reality. Maybe not your reality, Sarah said quietly. They stood facing each other in the parking lot, the distance between them, feeling like miles despite the few feet of pavement. Sarah saw clearly now what she had been trying to ignore. Connor's worldview was fundamentally incompatible with how she wanted to raise her children. His version of strength was aggression, hers was resilience. His idea of success was dominance, hers was kindness. "I think you should go," she said finally. Connor's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake. You need me, Sarah. You can barely keep your head above water with those 2 jobs. How long do you think you can keep this up alone?" The words stung because they touched on her deepest fears. But standing there, thinking of Ethan's joy at the library, of Lily's innocent trust, Sarah found a strength she didn't know she possessed. "I've been doing it alone for 4 years, she said. "I'll manage." "Fine." Connor threw the flowers on the ground, crushing several beneath his boot. "But don't come crying to me when your son gets bullied at school because you didn't let me teach him to defend himself. Don't call me when you can't make rent because you're too proud to accept. Help!" He got in his truck and slammed the door, the engine roaring to life. As he drove away, tires squealing slightly on the asphalt, Sarah stood in the parking lot, shaking slightly from the confrontation but feeling oddly liberated. When she entered the apartment, she found both children sitting at the kitchen table, pretending to read, but clearly having heard at least part of the argument through the open windows. "Is Connor gone?" Ethan asked in a small voice. Sarah sat down between them, pulling both children close. "Yes, sweetheart, he's gone." "For good?" There was hope in Ethan's voice that broke her heart. "I think so, yes." Lily looked confused. "But he gave us presents. Doesn't he like us anymore?" Sarah chose her words carefully. Sometimes liking someone isn't enough. Sometimes people just don't fit well together, like puzzle pieces that look like they should connect but don't quite match up. "I didn't like him very much," Ethan admitted quietly. "He made me feel bad about myself." "I know, baby, I'm sorry. I should have seen that sooner." They spent the evening reading their library books, making grilled cheese sandwiches for dinner, and watching Lily's favorite Disney movie. It felt like a weight had been lifted from the apartment, the atmosphere lighter without, the constant underlying tension of Connor's presence. But Connor Mitchell wasn't done with the Walker family. Over the next weeks, his attempts to reconnect grew increasingly insistent. Flowers appeared at Sarah's workplace. He showed up at the clinic during her shifts, forcing her to have awkward conversations in the parking lot. He sent long text messages, alternating between apologies and accusations, declarations of love and bitter recriminations. Sarah blocked his number, but he started calling from different phones. She considered getting a restraining order, but worried about the drama it would create in their small town. She hoped that if she just ignored him long enough, he would give up and move on. The breaking point came 3 weeks after their parking lot confrontation. Sarah had switched shifts with a co-worker and was home on a Tuesday afternoon when the school called. Lily had forgotten her lunch money, and could someone bring it to the office? Sarah grabbed her purse and headed to Pine Ridge Elementary, grateful for the excuse to see her daughter in the middle of the day. After dropping off the money, she decided to peek into Ethan's classroom, where she knew he had science at this time. What she saw made her blood run cold. Connor was standing outside the classroom door, talking to Ethan, who was pressed against the lockers, clearly uncomfortable. Connor was leaning in, his body language aggressive, one hand on the locker beside Ethan's head. Sarah moved quickly, but quietly, getting close enough to hear Connor's words. "Your mom's being stubborn, but she'll come around. You need to help me out here, buddy. Tell her you want me back. Tell her you need a father figure. "I don't want you back," Ethan said, his voice trembling but determined. "Please leave me alone." Connor's face flushed. "You don't talk to me like that. Show some respect. Get away from my son." Sarah's voice cut through the hallway like a blade. Connor straightened, his expression shifting rapidly from anger to surprise to that familiar false charm. "Sarah, I was just having a chat with Ethan, man to man." "How did you even get in?" "Here?" Sarah positioned herself between Connor and Ethan, her protective instincts in full force. "This is a school. You can't just walk in." "I told them I was his uncle," Connor said with a shrug. "Wanted to surprise him with lunch." The casual admission of lying to school officials sent a chill down Sarah's spine. This was escalating beyond persistent ex-boyfriend behavior into something more concerning. "I'm calling the principal," she said, pulling out her phone. "And then the police." Connor's mask finally dropped completely, his face contorted with rage. "You're going to regret this, Sarah. Both of you. You can't just dismiss me like I'm nothing. I tried to help you, tried to be part of your family, and this is how you repay me." He stormed off before security could arrive, but the damage was done. Ethan was shaken, the school was alarmed, and Sarah finally realized that Connor's behavior had crossed the line from annoying to potentially dangerous. That evening, she filed for a protective order. The process was exhausting. Paperwork, statements, a court appearance, but necessary. The judge, after hearing about the school incident and reviewing the text messages Sarah had saved, granted a temporary order that would keep Connor away from all three of them. But Connor Mitchell didn't respect court orders any more than he respected personal boundaries. It started small. Sarah would notice his truck driving past their apartment at odd hours. Items would go missing from their small balcony. A plant, Lily's jump rope, a cushion from the chair. She reported each incident to the police, but without proof it was Connor, there was little they could do. The harassment escalated. Someone slashed Sarah's tire in the hospital parking lot during her night shift. Their apartment door was egged while they slept. Disturbing notes appeared under their windshield wipers. "You can't hide forever." "A boy needs a father." "I'm watching." Sarah installed new locks, varies her routes to work, and kept the children close. She was exhausted from the constant vigilance, the never-ending stress of looking over her shoulder. The police increased patrols around their apartment, but Connor always seemed to be one step ahead, never quite crossing the line into behavior that would warrant arrest. The worst part was watching how it affected the children. Ethan had regressed to sleeping with a nightlight, jumping at sudden noises. Lily had started having nightmares, clinging to Sarah whenever they were in public. The carefree childhood Sarah had worked so hard to provide was being stolen by one man's inability to accept rejection. Everything came to a head on that October night when Sarah was called in for an emergency shift at Riverbend Nursing Home. She had hesitated to leave the children alone, but Mrs. Kowalski, their elderly neighbor, was visiting her sister, and Sarah couldn't afford to lose her job. She made sure all the doors and windows were locked, left her phone with Ethan in case of emergency, and promised to be home as soon as possible. "It's just a few hours," she told them, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. "Stay inside. Keep the door locked and don't answer for anyone. I'll be home before you know it." As she drove away, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was making a terrible mistake. But what choice did she have? She needed this job to keep a roof over their heads, food on the table. She told herself Connor wouldn't dare come to the apartment, not with the protective order in place. She was wrong. Inside the apartment, Ethan helped Lily with her homework, made her a simple dinner of mac and cheese, and tried to maintain their normal routine. He kept checking the locks, peering out the window at every sound. The rain that had been threatening all day finally began to fall, gentle at first, then with increasing intensity. Around 8:30, as Ethan was helping Lily brush her teeth, they heard a knock at the door. Both children froze. "Mum said not to answer," Lily whispered, toothpaste foaming around her mouth. Ethan nodded, his heart pounding. They stood silently in the bathroom, barely breathing. The knock came again, louder this time. Then a voice they both recognized with sickening dread. "Sarah? Kids? I know you're in there. I just want to talk." Connor. Despite the protective order, despite all the warnings, he was here. Ethan grabbed Lily's hand and pulled her into their bedroom, closing and locking the door behind them. He pushed the dresser in front of it with strength born of pure adrenaline, then grabbed his mother's phone. His fingers shook as he dialed 911, but before he could press send, they heard the sound that would haunt his nightmares for months to come. The front door splintering as Connor kicked it in. "Where are you hiding?" Connor's voice was slurred. Angry, the sound of furniture being knocked over reached them through the bedroom door. "I just want to see you. Just want to talk to your mom." Ethan made a split-second decision. He couldn't call 911. By the time police arrived, it might be too late. Instead, he opened the bedroom window, helped Lily onto the fire escape, and followed her out into the storm. But Connor heard the window opening. As they reached the bottom of the fire escape, he appeared at their apartment door, his face twisted with rage and alcohol. "Get back here!" he shouted, starting down the main stairs. Ethan grabbed Lily's hand and ran. They splashed through. Puddles, rain soaking through their clothes in seconds. Behind them, they could hear Connor's heavy footsteps, his angry shouts. They ran through the parking lot, past the dumpsters, toward the small playground at the edge of the apartment complex. Ethan's mind raced. Where could they go? Mrs. Kowalski was gone. The other neighbors barely knew them. The police station was miles away. "In here," he whispered to Lily, pulling her behind the maintenance shed. They crouched in the shadows, trembling from cold and fear. Connor's voice carried through the rain. "I know you're out here. You can't hide from me. I just want to talk." Lily whimpered, pressing her face against Ethan's shoulder. He held her tight, trying to think. They couldn't stay here. Connor would find them eventually. They needed help, needed to get somewhere safe. That's when Lily shifted position and slipped on the wet ground. Her head connected with the corner of the shed with a sickening crack, and she crumpled to the ground. "Lily!" Ethan shook her gently, panic rising in his throat. Blood seeped from a gash on her temple, mixing with the rain. She moaned softly, but didn't open her eyes. The sight of his sister's blood triggered something primal in Ethan. Fear transformed into desperate determination. He had to get her help, had to get her away from Connor, had to save her like he'd always promised he would. Without fully forming a plan, Ethan scooped Lily into his arms. She was heavier than he expected, but adrenaline gave him strength. He peered around the shed. Connor was searching near the playground, his back to them. Ethan ran. He ran through the parking lot, past the darkened apartments, onto Mill Street. The rain pounded down, turning the sidewalks into rivers. His arms burned from Lily's weight. His legs trembled with exhaustion, but he kept going. Behind him he heard Connor's voice, fainter now but still pursuing. The hospital. He had to get to the hospital. St. Mary's Medical Center was the only place he could think of where they'd be safe, where someone could help Lily. But it was so far, nearly 3 miles through the storm. Ethan's world narrowed to the rhythm of his footsteps, the sound of Lily's labored breathing, the feel of rain streaming down his face. His arms screamed in protest, his back spasmed with pain, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. His sister needed him. When he reached Main Street, the storm was at its full fury. Wind whipped the rain sideways, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Thunder crashed overhead, lightning illuminating the empty streets in stark, terrifying flashes. Ethan stumbled, nearly dropping Lily. His strength was failing, his body reaching its absolute limit. But the hospital was still a mile away, and he could no longer hear if Connor was following. All he could hear was the storm and his own ragged breathing. Then Lily stirred in his arms, her eyes fluttering open briefly. "Ethan, she whispered. "My head hurts." "I know," he gasped, adjusting his grip. "We're almost there, almost safe." Her trust in him, absolute and unquestioning, gave him the strength for one final push. He staggered forward, each step an act of will, each breath a struggle. The block seemed endless, the storm merciless, but finally, the lights of St. Mary's Medical Center appeared through the rain. The automatic doors of the emergency room opened like the gates of salvation. Ethan stumbled through them and collapsed to his knees, Lily still clutched protectively in his arms. "Help!" he croaked, his voice barely audible. "Please, help, my sister." And then the world went black. When Ethan woke, he was in a hospital bed, warm blankets piled over him, an IV in his arm. His body ached everywhere, but his first thought was of Lily. "She's okay," a gentle voice said. He turned to see Dr. Foster sitting beside his bed. "Thanks to you, she's going to be fine. You saved her life, Ethan." The events that followed blurred together in his exhausted mind. The police arriving, his mother's tears when she rushed in from work, the awful moment when they had to explain what had happened. When the truth about Connor finally came flooding out. Connor was arrested that night, caught trying to flee town. The break-in, the violation of the protective order, the child endangerment, it was enough to put him away for a long time. But more importantly, it was enough to finally, truly keep the Walker family safe. In the days that followed, as Ethan recovered from his ordeal and Lily's head wound healed, the true impact of that night became clear. The community that had seemed so distant rallied around them. Neighbors they barely knew offered support. The school provided counseling. Sarah's co-workers at both jobs arranged schedules so she wouldn't have to leave the children alone. But the biggest change was in Sarah herself. The guilt and self-blame were overwhelming at first, but with help from therapists, from friends, from her remarkably resilient children, she began to forgive herself. She had made mistakes, yes. She had let loneliness cloud her judgment, but she had also raised a son whose love for his sister had given him the strength to carry her through a storm to safety. 6 months later, the Walker family had settled into a new kind of normal. They had moved to a new apartment, one with better security and neighbors who looked out for each other. Sarah had found a better-paying job with regular hours. The children were in therapy, working through their trauma with the help of skilled counselors. Connor Mitchell was serving a 5-year sentence with no possibility of early parole. This protective order would remain in place permanently. On quiet evenings, when the three of them sat reading together or watching movies, Sarah would sometimes catch Ethan checking the locks or startling at unexpected sounds. The innocence of childhood had been scarred by their ordeal, but she also saw his strength, his resilience, his fierce protectiveness of his sister. And sometimes, late at night, she would stand in her children's doorway, watching them sleep peacefully and marvel at the journey that had brought them here. The road had been harder than she ever could have imagined, but they had traveled it together. In the end, that was all that mattered. The October storm had washed away more than just the illusions Sarah had held about Connor. It had revealed the true strength of her family, the power of a brother's love, and the unbreakable bonds that held them together. They were scarred but not broken, wounded but healing, and most importantly, they were safe. As winter gave way to spring in Pine Ridge, the Walker family looked toward a future free from fear, rich with possibility, and brightened by the knowledge that they could weather any storm as long as they faced it together. The escalation began the day after Sarah ended things with Connor in the parking lot of Cedar Grove Apartments. What started as a steady drizzle that morning transformed into a deluge by evening, as if the weather itself reflected the storm about to descend upon the Walker family. Sarah noticed Connor's truck circling their block 3 times that day, always slowing as it passed their building, though he never stopped. She tried to convince herself it was coincidence, that Pine Ridge was a small town and encounters were inevitable. But by the second day, the pattern was unmistakable. Connor appeared wherever Sarah went, at the grocery store, outside the clinic where she worked, even at the gas station where she stopped on her way home. He never approached, never spoke, just watched from a distance with an intensity that made her skin crawl. When she mentioned it to a co-worker, she was told she was probably imagining things, that Connor was just having trouble letting go. The third day brought the first direct contact. Sarah found a note tucked under her windshield wiper when she left her night shift at Riverbend Nursing Home. The message was written in Connor's distinctive block letters. "You're making a mistake. We belong together. Don't throw away something good because of one bad day." Sarah crumpled the note and threw it away, but saved it first by taking a photo with her phone. Something told her she might need evidence later. That same instinct made her start documenting everything. The times she saw his truck, the places he appeared, the feeling of being watched that followed her everywhere. The harassment escalated gradually but steadily. Flowers appeared at both her workplaces with cards that grew increasingly desperate. "Please talk to me. I can change. You're breaking my heart. Don't do this to us." Sarah refused the deliveries, but they kept coming. Her co-workers began to notice, offering sympathy mixed with subtle judgment. Why was she being so harsh to a man who was clearly just in love? Then came the phone calls. Connor had apparently gotten hold of several different phones, calling from numbers she didn't recognize. The first few times she answered, hoping it might be about the children's school or a work matter, but it was always him, his voice alternating between pleading and angry, apologetic and accusatory. "You can't just cut me out like this," he said during one call that caught her off guard at the clinic. "I care about you and those kids. Ethan needs a father figure, whether you want to admit it or not." "Connor, please stop calling," Sarah said firmly, aware of patients in the waiting room. "It's over. You need to accept that." "Nothing's over until I say it's over," he replied, his tone shifting to something darker. "You'll see. You'll realize what you're throwing away." Sarah hung up and immediately blocked the number, but within hours, calls came from a different phone. She stopped answering unknown numbers altogether, but the voicemails piled up, each one more unsettling than the last. The impact on the children was impossible to hide. Ethan became hypervigilant, always checking locks, peering out windows, startling at unexpected sounds. He insisted on walking Lily to and from her classroom at school, even though it made him late for his own classes. Lily, picking up on the tension, became clingy and anxious, refusing to sleep in her own bed and having nightmares when she did, managed to fall asleep. "Why is Mr. Connor being mean?" Lily asked one evening, as Sarah tucked her in for the third time, her small face pinched with worry. "He's not being mean, sweetheart," Sarah lied, smoothing her daughter's hair. "He's just having trouble understanding that we need space right now." But Ethan, sitting on his own bed with a book he wasn't really reading, looked at her with eyes far too knowing for his age. He understood exactly what was happening, even if the adults around them tried to minimize it. The first act of real vandalism occurred exactly 2 weeks after their breakup. Sarah came out to her car on a cold October morning to find all 4 tires slashed. The cuts were clean, deliberate, and the message was clear. She called the police, but without proof it was Connor, though who else would it be? They could only file a report and suggest she vary her routines. The expense of new tires strained her already tight budget, forcing her to take extra shifts at the nursing home. This meant relying more on Mrs. Kowalski to watch the children after school, an arrangement that made her nervous, but seemed unavoidable. The elderly neighbor was kind but hard of hearing and often dozed in front of her television. Still, she was better than leaving them alone. Connor must have been watching, learning their new patterns because he began showing up at the children's school. The first time, he was just sitting in his truck across the street when Sarah arrived to pick them up. The second time, he was standing by the fence during recess, ostensibly watching construction work on the building next door. The third time, he tried to approach Ethan directly. "Hey, buddy," Connor called as Ethan walked toward the pickup area. "Can we talk for a minute?" Ethan froze, his backpack slipping from his shoulder. Other parents and children milled around them, oblivious to the boy's distress. I'm not supposed to talk to you," Ethan managed, backing away. "Come on. Don't be like that," Connor persisted, moving closer. "I just want to know how you're doing. How's your mom? How's Lily?" A teacher, Ms. Morrison, noticed the interaction and intervened. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, positioning herself between Connor and Ethan. Connor's charming smile appeared instantly. "Just saying hi to my girlfriend's son. No harm in that, right?" "Ex-girlfriend," Ethan corrected quietly, finding courage in the teacher's presence. The smile faltered. "Right. Well, tell your mom I said hello." Connor walked away, but the damage was done. Ethan was shaken, and when Sarah heard about the incident from Ms. Morrison, her fear crystallized into determination. The next day, she filed for a protective order. The process was more complex than she'd anticipated. She had to document the pattern of harassment, provide evidence of threats, prove that she felt genuinely fearful for her family's safety. The judge, a stern woman named Horvath, reviewed the materials with careful attention. "Ms. Walker." "Judge," Horvath said, peering over her reading glasses, "while Mr. Mitchell's behavior is certainly concerning, I don't see evidence of direct threats of violence. Has he ever physically harmed you or your children?" "No, Your Honor," Sarah admitted, "but his behavior is escalating. The slashed tires, the constant surveillance, approaching my son at school." "I understand your concern," the judge interrupted. "I'm granting a temporary protective order that requires Mr. Mitchell to stay at least 500 feet away from you, your children, your home, and your workplaces. He's also prohibited from contacting you directly or indirectly. This will be in effect for 30 days, at which point we'll have another hearing to determine if a permanent order is warranted." Sarah felt a mix of relief and frustration. 30 days seemed both too long and not long enough. But at least now there would be legal consequences if Connor continued his harassment. When Connor was served with the order, his reaction was explosive. He called from a friend's phone, leaving a voicemail that dripped with rage. "You think a piece of paper is going to keep me away? You think you can just destroy my life and walk away? This isn't over, Sarah. Not by a long shot." Sarah saved the voicemail and immediately reported the violation to the police. Connor was arrested that night and spent 24 hours in jail before posting bail. The incident should have been a wake-up call, should have made him realize the seriousness of his situation. Instead, it seemed to fuel his obsession. The night he was released, Sarah was working at the nursing home when she received a call from Mrs. Kowalski. The elderly woman was nearly hysterical, her words coming in gasps and fragments. "Sarah, dear, you need to come home. The children, there was a man. I called the police, but..." Sarah's blood turned to ice. She ran to her supervisor, barely explaining before racing to her car. The drive home was the longest 15 minutes of her life, her mind conjuring horrible scenarios with each passing second. When she turned onto Mill Street, she saw police. Cars outside their building, lights flashing in the darkness. She found Ethan and Lily with Officer Briggs in Mrs. Kowalski's apartment. Both children were unharmed but visibly shaken. Lily clung to her brother, while Ethan's face was pale but determined. "Mom!" Lily flew into her arms, tears streaming down her face. "Mr. Connor was here. He was yelling and banging on the door." Officer Briggs filled in the details. Connor had somehow gotten into the building. Later they'd discover he'd convinced another tenant he was there to surprise Sarah. and had spent nearly 20 minutes pounding on their apartment door, demanding to see the children. Mrs. Kowalski had heard the commotion and called 911, but Connor fled before police arrived. He violated the protective order, Officer Briggs confirmed. We have a warrant out for his arrest now. But Ms. Walker, you should know, when we checked your apartment, we found evidence of forced entry. It looks like he managed to get inside before Mrs. Kowalski called us. Sarah's knees nearly buckled. The thought of Connor in their home, touching. The things invading their sanctuary made her physically ill. What did he do? Nothing was obviously damaged or stolen, the officer said carefully, but you should check thoroughly. Sometimes in these situations, perpetrators take personal items, photos, clothing, things with sentimental value. That night, after the police left and she'd tucked the children into her bed, neither would sleep in their own room, Sarah went through their apartment with shaking hands. At first, everything seemed normal. Then she started noticing small things. A photo of the three of them at the park was missing from the refrigerator. One of her scarves was gone from the closet. Lily's favorite stuffed animal, the one she'd stopped sleeping with months ago but kept on her dresser, had vanished. But it was what she found in her own bedroom that chilled her to the bone. On her pillow was a note in Connor's handwriting. You can't hide from true love. We're meant to be together. I'll wait as long as it takes. The next morning, Sarah made two difficult decisions. First, she took the children to school and then drove to the police station to update her report. Detective Martinez, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, took her statement with professional concern. Ms. Walker, I want to be honest with you, Detective Martinez said. These situations can escalate quickly. Mr. Mitchell is displaying classic stalking behavior. The obsession, the boundary violations, the increasing boldness. Has he ever been violent with you or the children? Sarah thought back over their months together. He never hit us, but he would grab Ethan sometimes too hard, and he had a temper, especially when he was drinking. The detective made notes. We're looking for him now. In the meantime, you need to take precautions. Vary your routines. Stay with friends if possible. Keep your phone charged and with you at all times. Don't go anywhere alone if you can help it. Sarah's second decision was even harder. She called her supervisor at the clinic and requested a leave of absence. She couldn't afford the lost income, but she couldn't risk leaving her children in anyone else's care right now. Her boss was understanding, but could only give her 2 weeks unpaid leave. After that, she'd need to return or risk losing her position. The next few days passed in a blur of hypervigilance. Sarah kept the children home from school, doors locked, curtains drawn. They played quiet games, watched movies, and tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. But the strain was visible on all their faces. Lily had developed a nervous habit of twisting her hair, while Ethan jumped at every creak and groan of the old building. Connor remained at large. There were reported sightings. A gas station attendant thought he'd seen him heading north. A motel owner called about a man matching his description. But nothing concrete. It was as if he'd vanished into thin air. Though Sarah could still feel his presence like a shadow over their lives. On the 5th day, disaster struck from an unexpected direction. Sarah's supervisor called with bad news. The nursing home where she worked her night shifts was cutting staff due to budget constraints. Her position was being eliminated effective immediately. The loss of income was devastating, even with both jobs. She'd been barely making ends meet. With only her clinic salary, she wouldn't be able to afford rent, let alone utilities and food. That night, as rain began to fall over Pine Ridge, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with a calculator and a notepad, trying to make the numbers work. No matter how she juggled them, they came up short. She'd have to dip into her meager savings just to get through the month. And then what? "Mom!" Ethan's voice startled her. He stood in the doorway in his pajamas, concern etched on his young face. "Are you okay?" Sarah quickly wiped her eyes, not realizing she'd been crying. "I'm fine, sweetheart, just tired. You should be asleep." "I couldn't sleep." He moved closer, glancing at the papers spread across the table. Even at 10, he understood enough to recognize bills and worry. "Is it about money?" Sarah sighed. There was no point lying to him. He was too perceptive, had been forced to grow up too fast. "We're going through a tough time, but we'll figure it out. We always do." Ethan nodded solemnly. "I could get a paper route. Tommy's brother has one and makes $20 a week." The offer broke Sarah's heart. "Oh, honey, no. School is your job right now. Let me worry about the money." They were interrupted by a loud crack of thunder that shook the windows. The rain, which had been steady, suddenly intensified into a full-blown storm. Lightning illuminated the room in stark flashes, and the wind howled through the gaps in the old window frames. "Mum, I'm scared." Lily's voice came from the hallway. She padded in, dragging her blanket, her face pale in the stormlight. Sarah pulled both children close. "It's just a storm. We're safe inside." But even as she said the words, she felt uneasy. Something about this night felt different, charged with more than just electricity from the storm. Maybe it was the stress of the past weeks, the constant fear, the financial pressure. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. The power went out just after 9 o'clock. The apartment plunged into darkness, save for the occasional flash of lightning. Sarah fumbled for the flashlight she kept in the kitchen drawer, grateful she'd thought to check the batteries recently. "Let's make it an adventure," she said, trying to keep her voice light. "We'll camp out in the living room, tell stories by flashlight." They gathered pillows and blankets, creating a cozy nest on the living room floor. Sarah told stories from her childhood while the storm raged outside, trying to distract the children from their fears. But all three of them kept glancing at the door, at the windows, starting at every unfamiliar sound. It was nearly 11 when they heard it, a sound different from the storm, a scraping noise at the front door, like someone trying to fit a key in the lock. Sarah's heart stopped. She pressed a finger to her lips, signaling the children to be quiet, and crept toward the door. Through the peephole, she saw nothing but darkness. The hallway lights must have gone out too, but the scraping continued, now accompanied by a soft, cursing voice she recognized all too well. Connor. Sarah's mind raced. Her phone was in the bedroom, charging. The landline wouldn't work with the power out. They were trapped. "Mom!" Ethan whispered, but she shushed him again, her mind working frantically. The door handle jiggled. Then came a loud thump, as if someone had thrown their weight against the door. The chain lock held, but for how long? "Sarah!" Connor's voice boomed through the door, slurred with alcohol. "I know you're in there. We need to talk." Sarah grabbed both children, pulling them toward the back of the apartment. "Bedroom," she whispered. "Now." They had just reached the hallway when the front door splintered. Connor had given up on picking the lock and was using brute force. The sound of wood cracking sent terror through Sarah's veins. "Go out the fire escape," she told Ethan, pushing both children into their room. "Take Lily to Mrs. Kowalski's. Call 911. "What about you?" Ethan's eyes were wide with fear. "I'll be right behind you. Go!" The sound of the front door finally giving way reached them. Connor was inside. Sarah helped Lily onto the fire escape, the metal slick with rain. The storm immediately soaked them, but there was no time to worry about that. "Hold on to your brother," she instructed. "Don't let go." "Sarah!" Connor's voice echoed through the apartment. "Where are you? I just want to talk." Sarah watched her children start down the fire escape, then turned back to the apartment. She needed to buy them time, needed to keep Connor's attention away from the window. She grabbed a baseball bat from the closet, a gift from Connor, ironically, and stepped into the hallway. Connor stood in the living room, swaying slightly, soaked from the rain. His eyes were wild, unfocused, and he held a bottle in one hand. When he saw her, his face lit up with a twisted smile. "There you are," he said, moving toward her. "We need to work this out, baby. You can't just throw us away." "The police are on their way," Sarah lied, gripping the bat tighter. "You need to leave." Connor laughed, a harsh sound. "Always so dramatic. I'm not going to hurt you. I love you. You broke into my home. You're scaring my children. That's not love, Connor." His face darkened. "Don't talk to me about love. I've done everything for you, everything, and you just toss me aside like garbage?" Through the bedroom doorway, Sarah caught a glimpse of the fire escape. The children were gone, safely descended, she hoped. Relief flooded through her, giving her courage. "It's over, Connor. You need help." "Help?" He took another swig from the bottle. "You're the one who needs help, raising those kids alone, working yourself to death. I was offering you a better life." "You were offering control," Sarah shot back. "You wanted to change us, mold us into your idea of a perfect family." Connor's face contorted with rage. He threw the bottle against the wall where it shattered, filling the air with the sharp smell of whiskey. "I was trying to fix things. That boy of yours, he's weak, pathetic. Someone needed to make a man out of him. He's a child." Sarah's own anger flared. "A beautiful, intelligent, kind child who doesn't need to be fixed by anyone, especially not by you." Connor lunged forward and Sarah swung the bat. It connected with his shoulder, not hard enough to do serious damage, but enough to make him stumble back. For a moment they stared at each other, both breathing heavily. "You're going to regret this," Connor snarled. Then he turned and stumbled toward the door. "This isn't over." Sarah waited until she heard his footsteps retreating down the hallway, before she dropped the bat and ran to the window. Through the rain, she could see lights in Mrs. Kowalski's apartment. Her children had made it safely. But as she started toward the fire escape herself, she heard a crash from the stairwell, followed by children's screams. Her blood turned to ice. Without thinking, she ran toward the sound. At the bottom of the interior stairs, she found a nightmare scene. Connor had encountered Ethan and Lily in the stairwell. They must have come back, worried about her. In the struggle, Lily had fallen, her small body crumpled at an awkward angle, blood flowing from a gash on her temple. "Lily!" Sarah rushed forward, but Connor grabbed her arm. "Look what you made me do," he said, his voice strange and distant. "This is your fault." Ethan stood frozen, staring at his sister's still form. Then something seemed to break inside him. With a cry of pure rage, he launched himself at Connor, pounding with his small fists. Connor shoved the boy away roughly, sending him sprawling. "Pathetic," he muttered. Then he turned and fled into the storm. Sarah dropped to her knees beside Lily, her medical training kicking in automatically. The head wound was bleeding freely, but Lily was breathing. Her pulse was steady. But she wouldn't wake up, wouldn't respond to Sarah's increasingly desperate attempts to rouse her. "We need to get her to the hospital," Sarah said, gathering her daughter in her arms. But even as she stood, she realized the impossibility of their situation. Her car was in the shop. The power was out, no phones, and the nearest hospital was 3 miles away. That's when Ethan stepped forward, his young face set with determination. "I'll carry her," he said. "Ethan, you can't." "I can," he insisted. "I'm strong enough. I have to be." Looking at her son, Sarah saw not the little boy she'd been trying to protect, but a fierce young soul with strength beyond his years. Together, they fashioned a makeshift sling from blankets, distributing Lily's weight as evenly as possible across Ethan's small frame. "Are you sure?" Sarah asked one more time. She would try to support them, help carry the burden, but her own body was shaking with shock and exhaustion. Ethan nodded grimly. "She's my sister, I'll get her there." And so they set out into the storm. Sarah tried to help, tried to share the weight, but her legs kept buckling, her vision blurring with tears and rain. She stumbled repeatedly, slowing. them down until Ethan gently pushed her away. "Mom, call for help. Find someone with a phone. I've got her." The next hour would become legend in Pine Ridge, the story of the boy who carried his sister through the worst storm in a decade, who refused to stop even when his body screamed for rest, who loved so fiercely that he found strength beyond all physical limitations. Sarah ran ahead, pounding on doors, searching for help. Most buildings were dark, their occupants either asleep or gone. When she finally found someone with a working cell phone, she called 911, but the dispatcher informed her that fallen trees had blocked most roads. Emergency vehicles couldn't get through. By the time she caught up with Ethan, he was more than halfway to the hospital. His clothes were soaked, his face pale with exhaustion, but he kept moving. One step, then another, then another. Lily remained unconscious, her blood mixing with rain on Ethan's jacket. "Almost there," Sarah encouraged, though they still had nearly a mile to go. "You're doing so well." Ethan didn't waste energy responding. Every ounce of his being was focused on the task at hand. His legs trembled with fatigue, his arms burned from Lily's weight. But he didn't stop. When they finally saw the lights of St. Mary's Medical Center through the rain, Sarah felt her knees buckle with relief. She ran ahead, bursting through the emergency room doors. "Help!" she screamed. "My children, please!" Medical staff rushed out with a gurney. They found Ethan just outside the entrance, still standing, still holding his sister, even as his body swayed with exhaustion. It took 2 nurses to pry Lily from his arms. His muscles had locked in position, refusing to let go even when help had arrived. As they whisked Lily away for treatment, Ethan finally collapsed. Sarah caught him as he fell, cradling her brave boy as doctors rushed to attend to him as well. He had pushed his body far beyond its limits, driven by a love that defied physical possibility. "You did it," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You saved her." Ethan's eyes fluttered open briefly. "Is she okay?" "She will be," Sarah promised, though she didn't yet know for certain, "because of you." The hours that followed were a blur of medical procedures, police interviews, and slowly dawning realization of what had transpired. Connor was arrested, trying to leave town, caught in a routine traffic stop. He would face charges of breaking and entering, violation of a protective order, assault, and child endangerment. But the real story, the one that would be told and retold in Pine Ridge, for years to come, was of a 10-year-old boy who had done the impossible. X-rays revealed stress fractures in Ethan's legs from carrying his sister's weight. His muscles were severely strained, his body pushed to the point of rhabdomyolysis. By all medical accounts, he should have collapsed within the first quarter mile. But love, it seemed, had its own physics. Lily recovered fully, the head wound healing cleanly with only a small scar to show for her ordeal. She would have gaps in her memory of that night, which was perhaps a blessing, but she never forgot that her brother had saved her, had carried her through the storm when everything seemed lost. The community of Pine Ridge rallied around the Walker family. Neighbors organized fundraisers to help with medical bills. The school provided counseling. Sarah's job at the clinic was supplemented with a position at the hospital, where she'd made such an impression during those critical hours. Connor Mitchell was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with no possibility of early parole. The protective order became permanent, extending even beyond his eventual release. During the trial, when asked if he had anything to say to the family, he remained silent, his charm finally exhausted. 6 months later, on a mild spring evening, Sarah sat on a bench outside Pine Ridge Elementary, watching her children play on the playground. Ethan pushed Lily on the swings, both of them laughing in the golden light. To see them now, you might not guess what they'd been through. But Sarah could see the changes, the way Ethan still checked exits when they entered new places, how Lily stayed close to her brother even while playing. They were different now, all of them, scarred but stronger, wounded but wiser, and infinitely grateful for each other. As Sarah watched her children, she thought about the nature of strength. Connor had believed strength meant dominance, control, the ability to force others to conform to your will. But true strength, she now understood, was something else entirely. True strength was a 10-year-old boy carrying his sister through a storm, refusing to give up even when his body begged for mercy. True strength was choosing kindness over cruelty, love over control, sacrifice over self-interest. True strength was surviving the worst night of your life and still finding the courage to trust, to hope, to believe in goodness. As the sun set, over Pine Ridge, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Sarah called her children over. They ran to her, Lily chattering about a new friend, Ethan quiet but content. Together, they walked home through streets that held both terrible memories and the promise of better days. They were the Walker family. They had weathered the storm. They had carried each other through the darkness, and they had emerged into the light, bound by a love that no force on earth could break. In the end, that was all that mattered. That was everything. The story of that night became part of Pine Ridge's folklore, told and retold with various embellishments. But the truth was powerful enough without exaggeration. A young boy had carried his sister to safety through a violent storm, driven by love and determination that defied all logic. Ethan himself rarely spoke of it. When asked, he would simply shrug and say he did what any brother would do. But sometimes, on quiet evenings, Sarah would catch him absently rubbing his legs where the stress fractures had healed, a distant look in his eyes. In those moments, she knew he was back in the storm, feeling the weight of his sister in his arms, powered by the fierce love that had made the impossible possible. Years later, when Lily graduated from high school as valedictorian, she dedicated her speech to her brother. "Everyone has heard the story of the night Ethan carried me through the storm," she said, looking out at the audience. "But what you might not know is that he's been carrying me ever since. Every time I doubted myself, every time I was afraid, every time I wanted to give up, he was there, showing me what real strength looks like." Ethan, sitting in the audience with tears in his eyes, finally understood what his mother had tried to tell him all those years ago. Being sensitive wasn't weakness. Being kind wasn't soft. Love, real love, was the strongest force in the universe. And sometimes, in the darkest of storms, it was the only light that could guide you home. Up next, you got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.